7 to everyone. How we doing? How we doing? I thought I'd punish myself with some League of Legends while we're not having any joy with what do you call it? So I'm gonna go in VRAM. We're gonna give ARAM some tries. We'll give it some trials and tribulations. How we're doing. Thanks for coming back into the stream, Attack Cat. Welcome to everyone else that's joining us for the first time. My name is the announcer. Still says Star Citizen, does it? Let me have a loosh. Let's have a loosh at that. Oh, it does look. It didn't update it for me. There we go. That should do that now. So we'll get in a queue. We'll try and turn off the music in here actually. Enable music, there we go. Got it all sorted. I've not really played League of Legends for God knows how long actually. A long ass time. We got a game. We got Gragas. I don't want Gragas. Aurelia is probably a good one. Oh, Nightmare Cho'Gath. Let's go. We'll go with Cho'Gath. Mike's a little bit low for the music. It looks so good my side. It's looks all good here, bro. It automatically ducks my music down. It automatically sorts that, so yeah, not too sure. 07. Right, where is Mobalytics? We need Mobalytics open. Alright, here we go. Where's Mobalytics? Overwolf extension, yes. Match history, that's fine. Have we launched it? Is it launching? Because I haven't got any of my shit. Come on. They're gonna do it. It's not gonna do it, is it? Piri, Cho'Gath. No. Oh well. We've lost your chance to do our custom build. Ability to see what we're doing in game on this, please. Let me see game and League of Legends client. Transform, reset, and there we go. Alright, I'm guessing we're gonna go with, I don't even know what's happening with this, look. Something's going on my PC. There we go. nice. Good, good, good. I got rooted, that's fine. I'm not too fussed about that. That's not too bad. Right, let's see why I can't use this Mobilitics thing. Refresh. Weird, it's like we can't actually do anything with it. I'm gonna go with health scaling, I guess. Go. Nice, nice. Okay, so now we need to go. Yep, this was a right choice. Good. Nice. Nice, nice, nice. And we'll go for this next. Ollie. There we go, nice triple. I don't know if I got one, but okay.
An enemy has been slain. Double kill. Rampage. Triple kill. Quadra kill. Aced. You have slain an enemy. An enemy has been slain. Unstoppable.
There we go. GG's. Gonna go check on my cats.
This'll be a slaughter. Dead man walking.
Hopefully we'll get a good game.
I long for a worthy
Or maybe not.
opponent.
I don't know what's wrong with me today. I just not in the mood for most games. I don't know why. probably look at getting Lecter. There's evidence something's going on my PC because of the way this is lagging. Like, is it? It's like lagging a lot. Did I get it?
Enemy double kill. An enemy has been slain. Has been slain. Shut down. Has been slain.
Nicely done, nicely done. What do we need now? Eclipse. Right, let's keep going. I probably should have got another item there, to be fair. So someone's just asked to collaborate. FTS and the Scots do. Don't know who that is. Okay, let's go, let's go. Right. What we got next? Bloodthirster. I think we'll call it after this game and switch game. Do we just go back to Lee, Star Citizen? Because something's just not right with my PC today, and I feel like I mean,
Namobia, Bahu.
Right, we'll be right back. Stream, just bear with me. Right, guys, we are back with some Star Citizen again. I thought we'll try a bit. Whether it works or not, again, is a different story. So, but we'll see. We'll see.
Last call for passengers. The shuttle is preparing to depart. Please clear the hatch. Shuttle will be departing.
Please clear the hatch.
Approaching next station. If this is your stop, please prepare to disembark. Last call for passengers. The shuttle is preparing to depart. A friendly reminder to check your personal belongings before and after all shuttle flights, and to dispose of any trash in appropriate receptacles. Stress no less.
The Hercules accepts. As the premier ship in its class, it sets the standard for galactic transport on a massive scale. Contact your Crusader Industries to find out more.
Right, stream, we are back. Hopefully, this will work. Right, let's see what's going on over here.
Solid.
Retract landing gear.
Landing gear raised.
Right, let's have a look at going over to Lawville.
Shields offline.
Holly. We'll make our way up and over. I wonder if it's actually window capture that's causing the issue then. Initiate jump on my mark.
Preparing.
Engage.
Jumping.
Quantum drive is now on. Quantum drive is now off.
Hiya, Kalis. You're right, baby. Kalis is a good lad. Initiate jump on my mark.
Awaiting orders.
We passed out then. Engage.
Hyperspace jump.
Quantum drive is now on.
What we got? Wada wada. We're gonna have a little watch of a video together, guys.
You know, it's certainly the case that the rise of AI
Quantum fuel is at
has,
75%.
how should I say it, it's heightened our urge to delineate that which really makes us human, what really distinguishes us from any software running on any hardware, however refined and however sophisticated it may be. And for many, it surely is the case, right? That creativity, creative expression, those unexpected leaps that some have described poetically as being touched by the divine, it is creativity that for many is that essential element that is part of the answer that makes us human. And perhaps fittingly, throughout history, it has certainly been the case that the extremes of human creativity have sometimes brushed up against another human quality hovering at the extreme, and that's madness. Which raises the question, will we find that which is unassailably human by roaming the terrain of the human mind at its most extreme? And the guest for this conversation has used really the power of fiction inspired by some of history's most revered scientific visionaries to take us all on truly extraordinary treks to the far outskirts of human thought, emotion, and imagination, revealing in a deeply compelling way the agony and the ecstasy of scientific revelation.
Yeah.
So with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Benjamin Labatut, who's the author of When We Cease to Understand the World, winner of the PEN Award and New York Times Best Book of the Year, as well as his more recent book, The Maniac, featuring as a dominant presence AI's forefather, John von Neumann. Welcome, Benjamin. So many of the themes that you cover in your books are so close to my heart. You know, the notion of the human mind being able to go out and discern these deep hidden truths of reality. And I wanted to, in that regard, start with a quote from your recent book, The Maniac. And it's a quote from, you know, everyone's favorite 13th century poet and mystic, Hadewich of Brabant. I have no idea if I pronounced it anywhere near correctly, but it's a quote that really speaks to the power of reason, even the tyrannical grip of reason. So let's take a listen here.
I saw a queen wearing a gold dress, and her dress was full of eyes, and all the eyes were transparent, like fiery flames and yet like crystals. The crown she wore on her head had as many crowns, one above the other, as there were eyes in her dress. She approached me dreadfully fast and put her foot on my neck and cried out in a terrible voice, "Do you know who I am?"
Deploy landing gear.
Yes. Long,
Landing modules deployed.
you are my soul's faculty of reason.
So, pain and woe coming from the faculty of reason. As I read your books, I feel there's this love.
Team Battle Royale. Let me, that's for stream avatars. I don't know why that's on at the moment, Dark Baby. Let me see if I can give out launch for your stream.
Ourselves. So, can you flesh out
Let me see if I can give out launch for you, and I'll do that right now for you, bro.
I think it's absolutely fundamental because
How you doing anyway, Dark? You keeping well?
to regard these fantastic faculties that we have developed as something very pure and that is driving us towards the light, driving us ever higher. And I think that the only way to understand this is that while the light that we shine upon the world is brighter and brighter, it also casts a longer shadow. We are contradictory beings. That is one of the deepest truths about us. And that is, to me, the central truth of literature. The heart of literature is paradox and contradiction. So I myself am fascinated by reason and logic, but for reasons that I don't understand. I don't know why I am drawn to human beings who have this sort of almost magical ability for this gift for abstraction that is also a great, great curse. And I see...
Right, let's get back to stream avatars. I haven't been to stream in a while. Yeah, I'm keeping really well, bro. I'm just chilling. I'm just chilling, man. Been trying to get Star Citizen working properly, but obviously it's had a few issues lately. But let me get Steam avatars anyway. Stream avatars, should I say.
Zeus, the first thing he does is send the most wondrous woman to his best friend or his brother, I'm not sure, who's Pandora. And Pandora brings what she brought into the world. And so all of these things is sort of our wondrous ability to think is something that is tainted with sadness. And I think that while you began with to me, the one thing that maybe distinguishes literature from other things is that it is bound up with melancholy and sadness. I don't think there's anybody who's a good reader who doesn't know what it's like to be alone. So fiction,
yeah, true.
in that sense, is, while we use our reason, those faculties, we are, as writers, are wholly dependent on our subconscious, on possession.
And when we think about reason, right? I mean, there's a natural evolutionary explanation for it. Presumably, reason is what has allowed us to survive and to prevail. We're not the strongest creature out there. We're not the fastest creature out there, but we can figure stuff out. And so, do you see sort of an inevitability of this kind of melancholy and pain and woe because the way we got to be here is through this faculty of reason?
Yes, but I
Don't think that's going to work on that one, so we'll try...
I think those, wherever there's a spark of consciousness, there's also...
stream avatars.
joy as well.
COD Mobile, bloody hell, that's a long, long time ago.
Especially the animal kingdom, and particularly our mammalian lineage. There's just these ties that I don't think it's just our intelligence that has brought us to this point. I think it's our depth of feeling. I think that, and we use it all the time. Like, while we have built cities we think we built them with our minds, we built them with our hands. And the things that all of us, the things that we treasure about the world are really not so much the products of reason. However, as a writer in my books, I am fascinated by it. I am fascinated by this sort of almost unending creative capacity that we have. But whenever I
Don't know why it's not working at the
both
moment.
things
But
at once, there has to be some. It's reason, but it's wrapped.
never mind. I tried, but it's not working. Stream Avatars is not playing ball right now. Gina, what's up, darling? What do you
And you
need?
can see it in people like in some of my idols, like Kurt
The
Gödel.
cat just wants to go out, so just bear me a second, Strand.
One of his teachers said, I don't know if it
Gina, do you
was
wanna
the
wee?
ideas that drove him mad, or if you had to be paranoid to be able to
Have
think.
those ideas.
So these recursive streams of thought. Now, this whole, it's not just reason, it's how reason kind of turns on itself and bites its own head, that we get both the most difficult problems, almost unsolvable problems. But it is in that recursive functioning of reason where it looks upon itself that it gets strange.
And that's what Gödel did in the incompleteness theorems. Basically, it was self-reflective mathematical statements that sowed the seeds of their own destruction. Now, you focused in this most recent book on one particular individual that, in many ways, is the prime example of an extreme human mind, right? The father of AI, John von Neumann. And I just want to play another little excerpt. And this is a description of von Neumann that came from, I believe, the physicist Eugene Wigner, who, again, is another great mind. And let's just hear how Wigner described von Neumann.
I have known a great many intelligent people in my life. I knew Planck, von Lauer, and Heisenberg. Paul Dirac was my brother-in-law, Leo Szilard and Edward Teller have been among my closest friends, and Albert Einstein was a good friend too. But none of them had a mind as quick and acute as Janos von Neumann. I remarked on this in the presence of those men several times, and no one ever disputed me. Only he was fully
Hey, so my cat
awake.
just being a bit of an arsehole at the moment, basically.
Now, you already mentioned that you're not exactly sure yourself why you're fascinated with extremes. But when it came to
So, in terms of what we're doing here, let's have a look at.
this like mutant mind that seemed to be able to do things that nobody else could, or was it something about him as a human being that grabbed you?
I think John von Neumann is by far the most fascinating and probably the smartest human being of the last
Many would agree with that.
That's affirmative, Captain.
made others in his presence. There was something very alien about it.
Can we get any? I don't know if we can get anything here, but
He was the first computer before there was one.
Right.
That's how people kind of behaved in his presence. And to me, the reason I started writing about him was because
true. To be fair, Juno, I love her to bits, but she's just a bit of a mardy bitch.
of other sort of epiphanies that as human beings we can go through. And
I don't know what shall we do? Shall we try and get some more bounties done, knowing how laggy it is, or shall we just go and rent
a scientific awakening.
a vulture?
We're going through that. To me, when we discovered, when
Let me
Turing
rent the vulture.
it wasn't just writing another paper. I think what we're touching now with computation and information is something so profound. I would compare it with the impact that the Buddha had on us, or that Christ did, where we suddenly reach down into something that is going to transform us, and it's starting to do so now. The reason why we're here talking about AI is because it's not just another technology. It's different. It's making us question. It's making every
Where can I get a vulture from?
people on the street, people who have no
Be
interest
right
in
back, one
science.
second.
We're suddenly having to ask those questions that science has kind of pushed aside, because science knows that there are things that are beyond it, because that's where its power comes from. You delineate that you have limits, and those limits are the ones that give you power. And suddenly the things that we thought, well, we're not really going to go there because we don't have a good answer for that, they've become urgent. They have become politically urgent, economically urgent. What is the mind? What is consciousness? What is this thing that is language? You know, what? These are beings of mathematics running language. Something, to me, the reason why I wrote about von Neumann is because I said, well, if we have a historical analogy for superintelligence, it is John von Neumann. And the effect that he had on the world, that was one human being. So von Neumann machines, you know, are a very specific thing. But I feel that von Neumanns are kind of coming closer to us. So I use a lot of sort of religious metaphor in my writings and in my books because I'm trying to point out something that unfortunately has become obvious to everyone, which is that we seem to be on the verge of something quite cataclysmic, quite wondrous.
And do you have a sensibility of which way it will fall, or will it be both? I mean, do you see these computational developments that go back to von Neumann, are they going to change who we are as a species? Are we going to find ourselves living in a radically different way because we can think about and examine and explore things that in the past were simply beyond our ability to even contemplate?
Well, one of the things I keep thinking about is, if these beings tell us things about reality, will we be able to understand them?
Right, I
Because
am
that's what
back.
happened with John von Neumann. He would
And it is
start
cold.
to talk about
Yeah, it's a PC exclusive. You're right.
grasp what he was trying to actually do, no? And he had, as a human being, he would walk into Los Alamos and see that Richard Feynman had put up these sort of system where he was using computers who were mostly women doing calculation. And they were doing it to get the answer to a 3-week computation in 2 weeks because the bomb had to go off. Von Neumann didn't see that. He goes into the same room, he sees computers, the ones that we have now. And those jumps transformed our species. It just took a long time. But he knew it. He said, we're gonna have computational everything, biology.
It is so cold out there today, stream.
So if we put ourselves in relationship to something that is super intelligent,
I guess we'll just keep doing the
that's one of the questions.
what do you call it?
Understood.
It's always the case with technology, and this is still technology.
We'll just have to look at doing
What use we choose to decide. For me, it's
some more
we should use it to answer the questions that no human being-
missions.
There's a lot of them. I think that the most dangerous uses and the best are in science, are clearly not in art. There are those things, superconducting materials, where you just have to search out a space. It could take forever. Well, they're pretty good at forever. They're like, beings of infinity. They have no time to them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And we're starting to see that happen already in dramatic ways. But when you focus on an extreme human being, do you find that
This even does.
revealing deeper truths about who we are, or is it a completely distorted image because this individual like von Neumann is just so distinct from anybody else that it may be fascinating to examine an outlier, but do you feel that you gain insight to who we are through that exercise?
One of the things I've personally discovered about deep truths is that they're pretty simple, the deepest ones. So as a writer, you kind of try to dress them up in something else, because it's fundamentally on the surface of things that we find most of meaning is to be found in things that are almost everyday and almost commonplace. But because I'm a writer and not a scientist, it's like I'm not searching for truth. I'm searching for mystery. I'm searching for things that
Oh yeah, so the game is PC only. It's on its own launcher called RSI, Robert Space Industries launcher.
Humanity gets a lot from knowledge. It does. But it gets a lot from ignorance. Humanity gets so much from reason and intelligence and technology. But we also get a lot from madness and irrationality. We know this. I mean, we feel it. It's our bread and butter. Nobody reasons their way to love. Nobody gives their own life for something for reasonable, they don't have those objectives.
Only one person agreed that we don't reason our way to love. Thank you. Yeah.
Takeoff complete.
You know, it's a wonderful way of framing it. And you know, you mentioned Gödel, Kurt Gödel, before, and what he did to mathematics.
Retract landing gear.
Retracting docking modules.
What you could possibly know. So ignorance was sort of built into the system in some sense, and that had a dramatic impact on.
Wait, can I still do the? Let's see if we can do this.
Makes that quite clear. Let me just listen.
From Gödel onward, I was always afraid for him, because once he abandoned his juvenile faith in mathematics, he became more practical and effective than before, but also dangerous. He was in a...
Look at this. Yeah, AC Valhalla was a good one. I liked Odyssey a lot more though.
Strength of mathematics that Gödel found that there were, I'm sure most people are familiar with the basic idea that there's certain truths within given any mathematical system, there's certain truths that the system is unable to prove to be true. So there's a limit to what you can actually establish within a given mathematical system. So that limitation is what set von Neumann free.
Oh, but I think it.
Come on.
The young von Neumann,
Yes.
truly
obsessed.
believed
Yeah.
that he could redeem the world with logic. And I think that science, back then, in the early decades of the last century, we really did believe, and we had reason to believe, that we could find
All answers.
all answers and the foundation, because we're desperately trying to fill a God-sized hole in the world.
And so is that what you mean by juvenile there? That belief was some naive belief from someone who hadn't really come to grips with the nature of reality?
No, I think our juvenile impulses towards truth are fundamental. But when you wake up, and I think science, for example, as a whole woke up to
What we got here?
quantum mechanics, they were trying to get us to look back on ourselves. And Gödel's, please correct me if I'm bastardizing this, but what he says is applicable to all our lives. It's either you accept truths that cannot be proven, or you accept contradictions. So I think that's how we live. We live with that. We either take on a truth that you cannot demonstrate to anybody. So it's a very fragile truth. It's the truth of belief. Now, people who still have strong beliefs know that they cannot kind of show you an equation to back it up. Or you accept contradiction, which is to me,
Let's go take it.
literature feeds on that. It presents a contradictory version of the truth. I present von Neumann as someone who is angelic and demonic, because I really believe that it is that dual nature wherein we are inextricably bound between our horrible, horrible impulses and our almost angelic love towards each other, really, is something that literature can sort of explore better than other aspects of the human psyche. While science has forced us to take certain of the steps that we've taken that you have to understand when you walk the way of mysticism, where you have to hold two contradictory things in your head. It has also shown us that we need separate eyes on the world, that we can no longer look at things with one model. We need what
That was Steely's ship.
Bohr said about
Retract landing gear.
to me,
Landing module retracted.
We just stole the ship, bro. Let's go.
In the sense that they're distinct ways of looking at one thing, and you have to combine them in some way to
Exactly.
get the full picture.
and the fact that reason, by its definition, has blind spots. We always have that. And how do you get beyond the things, the biases that you know are there in your thinking? Because we cannot function without a point of view on the world. How do you do that? You have to be able to take a very different point of view. So I think that books, at least in the ones that I'm trying to write, are sort of trying to give the perspective of science, and at the same time,
Yeah, we robbed his spaceship.
are very different, and that come from mythology, from religion. And that I'm not claiming any of them to be correct. I'm just saying, listen, it's very good to look at a thing as if you were a 13th century monk and then put a microscope.
And killed herself.
So, when you look at people in the world today that hold so firmly to certain beliefs that
Do you like watching these kinds of videos, by the way, Dark?
deeply contradicted by
I love
all
waves.
that we know from our scientific investigations, how does that relate to the value you place on being able to hold these contradictory perspectives in mind? And I actually say this from a somewhat personal point of view because I hold many irrational beliefs. I do many irrational things. I mean, even concretely, you know, parents who have passed, do I speak to them? Yeah, I do. Do I really feel like they're hearing me? Not in any objective, real sense, but I still do it because that is what works for me. But at the same time, when it comes to
Oh, bless Brian.
external world, I don't allow those beliefs to influence what I do out there. So how do you balance this beautiful emphasis on the need to have the
The
irrational
guy on the right on this video is a very intelligent person.
has truth in it?
I think you're desperately trying to be reasonable, which is great, because it's something that we have taught ourselves. you know? To me, the way I see this is that if in any of these questions you change the words believe for think, you'll be fine. I
Yeah.
think about God. You should think about science. Belief is a different operation of the mind. The mind
Yeah.
lies
I agree with that.
sort of in a little pain, you know. When
Can you hear it okay?
it's not sure, when it's in a suspended state, you know, when it has to carry these opposing things, that's when we're truly, truly alive. And we see this not just in abstract things. We see it in our personal relationships.
Game's running a lot better now as well.
If you have a spouse, if you have a partner, it tears
Hey,
you
yo.
apart. But you also,
Hey, buddy. Where you going?
with your children,
You looking for anything in particular?
always there. And
I'm off to go
me,
get
that
some
is
ship upgrades.
almost the definition of human nature.
Much love, guys.
Human nature is to be many things. Human nature is to never be able to put your hands on the truth, but to be able to feel it out, you know, to intuit.
Right.
And if you go one step beyond, you start to think, you start to see that as in magic, which is something that I practice to warn off the
So slightly. So basically, let me turn the music down even more then, because the music is kind of loud. We're talking about exploring the extremes of thought with Benjamin Labatut. I don't know if we pronounce his name like that way, but this guy,
people should
brilliant mind, brilliant mind.
control the rationality, not the total irrationality where you give yourself over to things that you know exist only in the deranged territories of our imagination. But we're a haunted species. We're haunted by ourselves. We're haunted by our ideas.
Yes,
our
we are.
experiences. And there's no getting away from that.
And that's
What I think is both naive is to fully give yourself over to stories that come from the Neolithic, from tendencies that we developed to survive.
Yes, exactly.
That is just as naive as to repeat like a mantra, this does not exist, this does not exist.
Yeah.
It's idiotic. My child says, like, but Dad, like, you don't believe in God, he doesn't exist. I said, yes, okay, sure, but can you see that church? Can you see that person walking over there? There are these, existence is it's an ample concept. There's all kind of gradients. Can you be discriminating? Can you have a relationship to these things that is profound?
we need a lot of money.
A little bit playful. I think it's a better, we go mad sometimes trying to be too precise.
And so, von Neumann struggled with some of these very ideas.
Very cool.
Clearly had a mind
Hey, how you doing, Raven? You keeping well?
objective reality in a way that most mortals simply
Got a little bit of lag here at the moment, so I'll just see if we can
recognize,
force it
much
to
as you
resync.
are saying that we have this need for these other qualities that for many is encapsulated by some religious sensibility, by some notion of God. And you have Vigner
we go,
again
shadows
talking
better.
about
Bartenders are on strike, look. They're literally like, nope, we're on strike.
for what that is.
Gods are a biological necessity, he said to me on a particularly warm night at his home in Georgetown during that last summer when he could still get around on crutches. As integral to our species as language or opposable thumbs. According to Yangtze, faith had afforded the primeval peoples of the world a source of strength, power, and meaning that modern man lacked completely. And it was this lack, this profound loss, that now had to be addressed by science.
That's me, that's not von Neumann. I just want to be clear.
Yes, in fact, that was the question I was going to go to right now, so you actually sort of read my mind. You put words into the mouths of historical figures, presumably inspired by your research and some sense of what actually happened.
Can we make it to it in time? Come on, come on, come on.
Through
Yes, we got there. 4
urge to
seconds.
tell a deeper truth through fiction. And so when we hear something of that sort, or actually read it, of course, in your book, should we hear Eugene Vigner as saying that, or should I hear Benjamin Labatut saying that?
Both, because they're mixed, because reality is mixed. I mean, I understand, again, our need to separate things out is important, and our need to, but I am a writer of fiction, so I don't need to explain myself in that way, because I say very openly, and I say it all the time, I write fiction. The problem is that it's like 95% non-fiction.
Right.
But just that 5%.
I like that. I like that.
It's like, this is something that I think a lot about, is that we never ever interact with reality without putting extra layers of meaning onto it all the time. No, a chair is never just a chair.
Or no matter what I say to you,
No matter.
what my meaning might be intended to be, of course you're going to filter it through your entire experience.
So that's one of the frailties of the human experience. We have developed science because of that, to try to get at it. And then people like Heisenberg says,
Approaching next station.
there's a limit
This is
to
your
this.
stop.
Like
Please
there's a
prepare to
fundamental
dismount.
limit. And then you go into psychology, which is not
Last
exactly
call
a
for
science.
passengers.
It's sort of
The
a,
shuttle is preparing to
well,
depart.
I don't consider it a science. I
Bonjour.
think it's one of the arts. And the arts, what value do they have, if they have any? No,
Please clear
what
the
is
hatch.
it
Shuttle
that they
will be
have?
departing.
What they do is that they show us the world filtered through human eyes. It's human shaped, and that's what fiction is. Fiction is a tool. It's not an entertainment. No, I believe the only thing I believe in is that books are a little sacred, because it's like a old technology that we have sort of developed to catch this part of us that I guess it's like where science is sort of shooing away the spirit and literature is trying to catch it or to bring it back. And it's a very conscious operation, right?
Yeah.
It's Nietzsche had this wonderful sense that if you wanted to get at the truth, first you had to cover the truth. And that's what books do. You put a veil on things so that you can see them again. And science is sort of ripping off the masks of everything, right?
Now, at the same time, though,
Approaching
I
next
could be
station.
wrong, but
This is
I
your stop.
thought I
Please
read
prepare
or
to
heard you
dismount.
say that you really
Last
do
call
not
for
like the
passengers.
form of the
Shuttle is
novel.
preparing to
Right. Let's go and have a look at the cost of these upgrades, because... Am I naked? Of course I am. I died, didn't I? I need to get some upgrades.
No, the thing is that I went through, again, I kind of...
Mind you, can't I sell some bits, I think?
I
I've got the ability to sell some bits here.
a part of my brain that, the part
Let me
that
just have a
enjoys-
look to see if I've got enough to sell.
Because the novel is, again, I think we have to see it as technology. No? It's a particular shape that stories took. It's a particularly modern shape. And to me, it no longer, to me, it is a very personal thing. I'm not advocating people stop reading them or writing them, but to me, it simply does not reflect the shape that the human experience is taking. I think it's something, we have become
Because
more
it's
complex.
It's too invented? Is it,
No,
you
it's
know?
simply, it's cheating. it's full of tricks, and it's and also because
No, I can't sell any. Oh wait, hold on. I can sell one for 500k.
you are changing so much. I'm so
In
rapid.
demand. How do I sell it?
You have to
I've got nothing I can sell here.
literature is
What about in a Star Lancer?
of all artistic endeavors.
No.
We are, you know.
Never mind. We got nothing we can sell, guys. We'll
And I
get
don't
back.
know we can because
In,
we're
in the
dealing with
forms.
words.
Do you mean in the
Sure,
form?
yes, in the form, but also it is so antiquated. Our needs for stories. We need stories,
Cousins.
even if we know that there's no intrinsic meaning to things. We still need it, so we make it up. And if we're good at it, we all get bound up in these stories. To me, the problem with the novel is that on the first paragraph, I'll be like, oh, they're trying to tell me a story. And it's like it's like when you're trying to read a story to a 13-year-old, they're like, I don't want to hear that anymore. Give me something else. I want raw data. Give me some crack cocaine. I mean, literary crack.
Literary
not-
version
not-
of it.
Sorry. I mean, yeah, give me something concentrated. Give me something like Sebald. Give me an author like Sebald who gives you, you can read his books 20, 30 times, you'll always find something new. Give me something like
Still
Bolaños
got nowhere near enough.
that feels like the speed that the modern world runs on, but it's also antiquated, and it feels like, you know, it's like, it all feels like a Jane Austen novel, really, all of them.
Right. So, you know, in looking for,
Chat, what's your favourite books to read?
many look at some kind of legacy or some kind of influence on the world, which, you know, certainly was the case for von Neumann, right? As you described, and I went to check on the historical record just to see if this was aligning, you know, the 95% is certainly accurate, if not more in this particular case. And so there's this wonderful moment where his daughter is by von Neumann on what turns out to be his deathbed. So can we just hear what she describes it as?
He was fascinated by the stark contrast between the way computers and brains processed information. But he also saw certain similarities that suggested that perhaps one day we could begin to merge with machines in a way that would either allow computers to become aware or permit our species to exist in a manner that would make us immune to corruption.
Favourite book?
So being immune to corruption and disease, of course, would be the ultimate dream for someone who wants to have a legacy. And she goes on, if we could, in the next quote, to speak of that.
His eyes trembled and watered while I caressed the few remaining strands of his hair and placed the back of his hand against my cheek. I could tell that he was very afraid, and not just of death. My father's second great fear as he lay dying was that his work would not endure and he would be forgotten.
Yeah.
He has been forgotten.
Yes.
He has been forgotten. I mean, not by scientists, of course. He's everywhere. But to me, von Neumann exists in this world like the Holy Spirit. He's everywhere, but nowhere really. And the way that he died is something that we can all learn from, because the paradox of pure reason is that it doesn't allow you to participate in things that humanity has also developed to enrich our own lives. It's
Lag at the moment, guys. Sorry about this.
into meaning. It's like one of the things about one of the aspects that consciousness, I believe this is just not proven by any type of research, but I think consciousness, there's a difference between consciousness and intelligence. Intelligence is problem solving. Consciousness allows you to sort of participate in the other.
The next shuttle is approaching the station.
And we have had many examples where we can elevate our consciousness and sort of start to feel identified with things that are not you and that are not
Last
your
call for
children.
passengers.
Yeah, your
The
favourite
shuttle is
book?
preparing to depart. The next shuttle is
Sort of
approaching the station.
discovery that happened, I don't know how or when, how far back. But we have even got to the point where human beings elevate their consciousness and they equate it to God or the universe. So if you've done that, if you've been able to do that work inside of yourself in a truly, not in the I do yoga and eat healthy way, but in the actual ways that we have developed to do this, when you die, everything about your consciousness is kind of out there. So the entire universe survives you. However, von Neumann couldn't see any of that. And he couldn't see any of that. And he died in a way that is miserable. His daughter, his wife, they were ashamed of him because he could contemplate the murder of millions and millions of Russians because he was the one who said, look, it's perfectly logical to attack the USSR now that they don't have the bomb. Let's just bomb them. Get it done. That's what the equations say. But he could not see that he was a finite human being, that he was a biological system, and that he was going to die. And he couldn't see past his own death because I don't think he had, while his brain was sharp as a knife, his soul was dead and almost lifeless.
Right. And so the words that we hear, which resonate
I agree with that.
description wonderfully well, this description of him on the deathbed, fearing death and fearing being forgotten. If I hear those words as a blend of you and von Neumann, as you suggested, we might listen to these words. Do you fear death?
The next shuttle is approaching the station.
No, not really. I've never had, but because I was a very sad kid, and I was also, and I'm still a little bit too intense. And when you grow up like that, I was sure I was going to be dead by 30. Sure. Absolutely convinced. And I kind of did die when I was 30. Like my whole outlook on the world just collapsed. I was much more rational. I was much more, I really thought you could read everything, understand everything. I had a very naive but very vicious spirituality. And I had this sort of death moment where it kind of all fell apart. But I'm sure there's many people in the audience that understand that the central problem with the human experience, and it's not technology or it's really suffering. It's really that. That's kind of what, so if you have too much intensity, death it feels like a release. But then I had a child, right? Yeah. And a lot of that just goes out the window. And now I'm like, don't die because there's other people who actually need you.
And there's wonderful works, of course, that you are creating. And I have to say that, I have long felt so strongly that what makes us special as human beings is that we can, at one and the same time, calculate how long ago it was to the Big Bang, or what it's like if you fall into a black hole, or the electron's magnetic moment to 10 decimal places. We can do all that, and at the same time, we can still have the humility to recognize that there's so much we don't understand, and there's so much wonder out there in the cosmos. And if somebody wants to label that as the unified theory, or if they want to label that as poetry, or if they want to label that as God, so be it. Because ultimately we are this blend of the rational and the emotional, and you capture that in a way that to me is deeply insightful. So thank you so much for this conversation. Everybody, thank you. Thank you.
I really enjoyed that one. That was a really good talk. Ultra landing gear.
Gear up.
Oh, come on, bro. Stop simping. All right, let's go. Next video, we're gonna go with challenging conventional cosmology. Wait, is that a new one or did I watch that one before? No, we have watched that one before. Let's just go to... Oh no, we haven't. It's 12 days ago. I thought we did, but we haven't.
Welcome, everyone, to today's conversation. We're going to focus on the real deep foundational questions of physics, questions regarding how to really make sense of quantum mechanics, a question that we can't fully address as yet, questions that speak to the nature of time. Can we gain insight
So we've
into
got only these ones which we know don't work properly at the moment.
in a physical framework
say.
that we've discussed in this program before? The physics, the mathematics seems to treat
So we're gonna have to
forward
fly out a little bit
time
more.
and backward in time on equal footing. So can we get a handle on where this deep asymmetry in human experience comes from? So the kinds of questions that really speak to the way in which physics tries to really explain the world, both in terms of the experimental data, but also to explain the world in terms of
There we
human
go.
experience.
So bounty issued, low risk
Is
target.
what the
Nice.
core of the whole project of physics
Yellow.
is all about. And to discuss these deep issues in physics, I'm so pleased to have someone who's had a deep impact on these questions worldwide, but has also had a deep impact on my own thinking about these questions, and that is David Alvarez.
Engage jump on my mark.
Philosophy here at Columbia University in New York, where he directs the MA program in the Philosophical Foundations of Physics. So, welcome, David. It is so great to see you.
Thank you, Brian. You know,
I,
you also direct the MA program in.
I know.
Engage.
Has there been,
Engaging jump drive.
I wonder if I could shoehorn myself into that too. But yes, since I'm newly in that position,
Right.
it hasn't yet fully sunk in apparently. And partly I felt like we should have this conversation at the place where too infrequently we meet when we discuss these kinds of issues, the Hungarian pastry shop here in New York City. But this is probably a somewhat quieter, more contemplative place for us to have this conversation. So thank you for joining us. So what I'd like to do is begin with a story, a very, very short
Initiate jump on my mark.
that
Standing by.
happened in the late 1990s, I think.
Okay, let's go
where
and have
I
a look at
was
this.
just
Engage.
at Columbia, and I was asked to give a
Engaging drive.
in the philosophical
So it just timed out.
foundations of physics type of gathering that they have there. And I was giving a talk on work that we had recently done on trying to understand this quality of string theory in which you could have multiple different geometrical forms for the extra dimensions of string theory, and yet they could give rise to exactly the same physics, this phenomenon called mirror symmetry that I was involved in discovering, as well as other people like Ronan Plusser, Kumar Vafra, Nicholas Warner, many others as well, Philip Candelas. And after the talk, Shelley
Let's
Gold,
see if we can clear this out.
anybody in the Philosophical Foundation of Physics knows well, Shelley Goldstein came over to me in a very nice, supportive,
Initiate jump.
way and said to me,
All good.
physicists need to think more fully about ontology. And I have to admit, there's a chance that I, 30 years ago, did not know what the word ontology meant, in the context of these ideas. But since then, I've become to really deeply appreciate the need to investigate and think through and really test our understanding of what's real. What of our mathematics is actually telling us something real about the world? The ontology, the commitment to the things that make up the furniture of reality. And so I think that's a theme that will naturally have a place in all that we discuss here today. But where would you place the issue of ontology in the hierarchy of essential questions that we need to really address in order to have physics describe the real world?
Well, maybe it's worth backing up a little bit. As of the end of the 19th century, around the end of the 19th century, more and more people seem to feel, because of the sort of spectacularly impressive success of the project of physics up to that time, that physics was sort of the royal road to what people used to call metaphysics. That physics, that the right place to read off your metaphysics, the right place to read off your picture of what the world was really like, was to attend to, and as you say, what the fundamental furniture of the universe is, was to attend to what physics was telling you about that. And, I remember that what excited me when I was in junior high school, for example, about the theory of relativity, particularly, I guess, special relativity in this case, was this astonishing realization that what had seemed like philosophical questions, you say, gee, I'm curious about the structure of space and time. I wonder what experiments I might be able to do in order to shed light on that. And a very reasonable initial reaction, and this was certainly the reaction of people like Kant and all sorts of people in the philosophical tradition, that's not something you can do experiments to find out about, because you can't, any experiment you're going to do is itself going to be within space and time. There isn't any possibility of stepping outside of space and time to look at what their structure is. So you shouldn't hope for the possibility of doing experiments or doing observations that are going to have to, that are going to be able to somehow shed light on things like the structure of space and time themselves. They come before, they have to be in place before anybody even starts talking about an experiment. And all of a sudden, Einstein is able to show you how, if you're clever enough, you can trick these things into exposing features of themselves to observation, notwithstanding that, of course, everything you do in carrying out this
Engage, jump on my mark.
occurs within space.
Ready and waiting.
The background of space and
Engage.
time in the first place.
Hyperspace.
Being just floored by that. And like I say, sometime when I was in junior high school, and that experience of being floored by that very much was very formative of the way in which I was interested in physics ever since. That it was...
How we doing in stream? We all right? How's everyone keeping?
Pursuing what were essentially philosophical interest about the deepest aspects of the structure of the world, but pursuing them in a way where you weren't going to go back and forth for thousands of years in debates in people's bathtubs. And there was actually this thrilling possibility of learning something in the way that scientists learn things about these things that had seemed beyond the reach of anything like scientific investigation. So what was exciting to me about physics was this idea that you could use it to sort of stage raids on what had traditionally been philosophical territory and come back with these astounding treasures. Okay, enough autobiography. I think physics was very much in a mood like that at the end of the 19th century, that we had really found, in some sense, the right way to do philosophy, or at least the right way to do metaphysics, and that's to do fundamental physics. And what was interesting and what came to fascinate me a little bit later is that there was a sense in which all of that was declared to have collapsed. Those kinds of hopes were declared to have collapsed with the advent of quantum mechanics. That what was the kinds of phenomena we were running into in quantum mechanics were, I don't know whose quote this is, but it's a cute one, not merely stranger than we knew, but stranger than we could know. Stranger than you know, the human imagination, the scientific imagination is ever going to be able to fully penetrate. And you had figures, the founders of quantum mechanics, figures like Bohr and Heisenberg and Born and the people around them, who thought that what had been discovered only a little later than special relativity, what had been discovered about the structure of matter at the smallest scales, showed that these hopes to sort of that physics was going to be something from which we could read off our metaphysics, that physics was going to be something from which we could learn in a really genuinely philosophically satisfying way what the world was like. These kinds of aspirations for physics were declared to be naive by the founders of quantum mechanics. That's not what you could expect from physics. Your expectations from physics had to be much, much, much more modest than that. That you were going to be given algorithms which would enable you to predict the outcome.
Nice, we got that one done. Awesome.
Or something like that. But the deeper speculations about why those experiments came out that way and what was going on in between the beginning of the experiment and the end of the experiment, what was going on under the table, it was naive to imagine that physics was going to be able to answer questions like that. It was a kind of hubris to imagine that the human scientific imagination was going to be able to penetrate.
Initiate jump on my mark.
Far down
Ready and waiting.
Structure of nature, and
engage.
Hyperspace jump engaging.
Yeah.
So I presume you're referring, at least in part, to Niels Bohr.
I am. Yes.
Who famously took the helm of the quantum explorations and basically shook people by the collar and said, stop asking those kinds of naive questions that you're used to from your classical intuition regarding how nature actually is.
Right.
The best we can ever do in physics, and the only thing we should expect of a physicist, is to make predictions for what we will see in our instruments when we do measurements. And so,
so we're here. Let's go get
on.
I mean, as a historical matter, it was, I think, a quite astonishing and astonishingly long episode in the history of science. One that I don't think has yet really begun to be explored in the depth it deserves by historians of ideas and historians of science. But there really was a pretty dogmatic and pretty brutally enforced insistence that these were not proper questions.
When you say brutally enforced, I mean people were kind of ruined.
People's careers were destroyed. People's careers were destroyed very simply and straightforwardly. And this happened over generations. I mean, this happened in various ways, dating from the 1920s, I would say through to the 1980s or 90s. It was a very long episode. It took many forms. I mean, it's a really interesting historical period. For example, in the 1950s, in the case of people like David Bohm, this insistence that people not ask these questions got tied up with the whole apparatus of McCarthyism in the United States. That's an interesting episode. Earlier on, I think, I mean, this is pure speculation, but I have this intimation that a lot of these pronouncements on the part of people like Bohr had to do with a kind of zeitgeist that was in the air at the time that had to do with various forms of modernism in art and in literature and so on and so forth. You know, I think Bohr, you know, had something in mind like saying to the modernists, you think you've got a crisis of representation? Okay. We don't have a crisis of representation just about human motivations or something. We got a crisis of representation about rocks. Okay. That's infinitely more radical than your crisis of representation. And so at various times, this played into the historical moment in various different ways. And some of them were interesting, philosophically interesting, and so on. And others were just silly and dogmatic and often brutal, like we've been saying.
And we should add, though, there are still many in the physics community who hold to the perspective that Bohr laid down. So it's not as though we all uniformly look back at that period as a time when there was unnecessary suppression of a certain kind of curiosity. But it's also worth, on the other hand, to note, I think Bohr's view was not that the approach that he was putting forward with many other colleagues was somehow meant to suppress certain kinds of questions. It was more a profound, radical, philosophical change of what we were supposed to expect from the investigation and the whole project of physics, right?
I agree. No, I mean, they saw themselves as the vanguard of an enormous, earth-shaking, broad intellectual revolution. And this was connected, as far as I know, in Bohr's mind, with the work from a generation before of his countryman Kierkegaard, and also of people like Hegel.
We did not want that.
You know, that was part of the kind of philosophical education that Europeans like Bohr.
We're trying to make a new YouTube channel, right? And, well, I say a new one. We've got Beat Foundry, and the nice thing with Beat Foundry is we've got music on there. So what we're going to be doing is making some sultry and sensual. And there's apparently a particular program that you can use for Suno that will give you the best results from this.
Okay. That the aspiration of science
which is one that you just saw,
to tell us literally and straightforwardly what the world is really like. This was regarded as hopelessly and laughably naive, okay, at the time. Exactly what had excited, you know, a junior high school David Albert about Einstein. That was the very picture of what Bohr and his circle thought to have been revealed as hopelessly and laughably naive as a set of hopes for what science might give us.
And how convinced are you now that was the wrong way of going about it?
I mean, completely convinced. I mean, we may end up, maybe we'll get to talk about this. There are all kinds of questions about where we might end up, okay? But the idea that, you know, Bohr thought he had arguments. These arguments are not easy to reconstruct now in hindsight. When you try to do them, it just sort of falls apart in your hands. But it had something to do, Bohr had some idea like, well, there's the following.
We just hit him.
Part of the whole science.
Okay, that was close.
On the one hand, he thought We absolutely need to describe our experimental results and to communicate our experimental results and to reason about our experimental results in what he called classical language. This was inescapable. Why it was inescapable, I was never sure. Is there some reason why we can't learn the quantum mechanical language? I don't know. Bohr thought this was a very deep fact about the way science not only proceeds but must proceed. And at the same time, this classical language had been revealed as inadequate for the description of subatomic phenomena. Okay?
Just going to actually quit the game and restart.
There was no option of learning the quantum mechanical language. You were stuck in the classical language in reasoning about your experiments. And
having a short break, we'll be right back.
The minute you saw this predicament, if you had any intelligence at all, you would see that this old hope of a sort of straightforward, naive, literal, realistic description of the world coming out of science was just hopeless. Okay, that there was a tension between what you needed on the experimental level and what was emerging on the subatomic level. That wasn't a tension that you could hope to cure or resolve. It was a tension that once you saw it, you needed to simply accept. Okay, and that was it. I haven't really constructed much of an argument there. I don't know exactly what the argument was, but it involved locutions like that. Okay? And this was somehow very, very influential. And anybody who grew up in a physics education during the era that you and I grew up in physics educations knows very well that if you raised your hand in class and said, I don't understand this in a deep sense, you were told you're not supposed to understand it. And if you want to know why you're not supposed to understand it, go read Bohr's response to the EPR paper. And if you do go and read Bohr's response to the EPR paper, it's gibberish, okay? It's like listening to the Oracle at Delphi, or it's really hard to figure out what the guy is trying to say. But every physics professor will tell you that's where it's resolved. And if you ask the physics professor, could you just tell me what his main point is? The professor would say, go read the article. And you went to read the article. I heard the following rumor. I don't know if it's true. I don't want to vouch for its being true. But someone told me that the sort of canonical version of this Bohr paper that was published in all the main collections and so on, that was borrowed from collection to collection over the course of a period of like 60 years, turned out on closer examination to have the pages out of order, that there were 2 pages whose order was reversed. And no one ever noticed, okay? No one ever noticed, okay?
An argument so good that you could interchange and it still works.
Right, exactly.
And again, just to underscore your point, that it's not metaphorical or poetic. I mean, when I took quantum mechanics, I took it with Norman Ramsey, who won the Nobel Prize.
Right.
And I was the kind of kid who, when I didn't understand something, I would go to every office hour.
Right.
And like harangue the professor, which I'm sure became irritating, little doubt about that. But I peppered Norman Ramsey with question after question of, like, when you do the measurement, what are the other possibly, all the things that we now still struggle with. And he valiantly tried to respond, but in the end, it came down to versions of, read some of the papers of the founders, because that's where our understanding is. But we should also stress, of course, that quantum mechanics was doing such a spectacular job at the job that Bohr set it as its primary purpose, namely to explain the results in experiments. That I think people were willing to say, somewhere out there are answers to these deep questions, but right now we just want to use this theory to predict the spectrum of hydrogen and helium, to understand magnetic moments of particles and scattering amplitude.
And to change everyday life on Earth, which it did.
Yeah.
Hugely. No, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's a very important point to stress.
Yeah.
And no doubt, this bizarre intellectual situation would not have survived nearly as long as it did if not for the really spectacular empirical success of quantum mechanics. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one way of framing the tension that you described between Bohr's stipulation of using classical language and talking about equipment and measurements and using the quantum formalism when actually analyzing the subatomic particles, one way of framing that tension is, as you said, why can't you use the quantum language to describe the equipment? After all, the equipment is made of the particles, the very same stuff that you're using in the subatomic realm, the quantum formalism to describe. It's just a lot of those particles put together. And the person in the brain also made of the same ingredients, it's just in some configuration. So isn't it all quantum mechanics all the way through? And I think certainly that's the view that has taken over.
I think that's right. And I mean, this relates back to the question you asked a few minutes ago. How convinced am I that Bohr was wrong about all this? Yeah, I'm 100% convinced that Bohr was wrong about all this. We do now have explicit, well worked out models, at least in the case of non-relativistic quantum mechanics. There may be questions in the relativistic case, so on and so forth. But at least for the cases that Bohr was focusing on, we have explicitly worked out models about how to go native in this way, okay? How to use the quantum mechanical formalism to describe everything, including us making our measurements, including us having this conversation, blah, blah, blah. So Bohr has just been shown to be wrong in that way in what they call in mathematics a straightforward constructive proof, okay? A straightforward constructive counterexample. We've got them, okay? There are issues now about, gee, if we end up with several of them, which we do have on the table now, and they all, and say two or more of them turn out to be empirically equivalent to one another, there's no experiment that might be able to distinguish between them, then, if that's the way it works out, and we're many, many years from knowing if that's the way it's going to work out, if that is the way it works out, that's going to be a disappointment of a different kind, okay? It's not that we can't have even one picture of what's going on under the table, but we have too many. Once upon a time, this is a worry that philosophers refer to as underdetermination of theory by experiment. Once upon a time, people in philosophy of science who wanted to dismiss this worry as not very important used to give people lectures.
Seems like a dodgy one,
with actual scientific work. And if you had, you would know that the problem is not that we have too many empirically adequate theories. The problem is to get even one, okay? And the idea that you're worried about us having too many is just silly and historically unsupported. In foundations of quantum mechanics, it is beginning to look like there may be a worry like that. Or at least one can imagine future scenarios in which there turns out to be a worry like that. So
can we drill down on that worry a little bit further?
Sure.
Because I ultimately do want to get to the specifics of the quantum measurement problem, which you were alluding to in these theories that are on the table right now. But before we get there, the reason why I want to drill down a little bit further on the underdetermination issue is because one of the most powerful realizations in arenas like string theory and unified theories of the last 20, maybe 30 years or so has been
initiate jump on my mark.
What we call duality.
Right.
And that in some
Engage.
Engaging jump.
Because
Alright, string.
story that I told at the outset where we had two different forms for the extra dimensions, one theory. We now have many examples in string theory of two radically different mathematical formulations that we believe we can't prove yet, But we believe, because the evidence mathematically is so powerful, that they are absolutely physically indistinguishable, literally indistinguishable, and yet the mathematical formulations are so different. And I have to say, this has had a indirect, profound impact on me, because in the early years, like when we first began to talk about these sorts of things back in the 1990s, I had a very, I think, naive view that what we physicists were working, the mathematics was like, it was out there. It was like, it was reality. Like there was no difference in my mind, I think, between reality and the equations.
Oh, that's a nice view.
The equations might be wrong, in which case they were the wrong description of reality. But if they were right, they were kind of reality, isomorphic to it. But with all these dualities and other considerations too, I've come to a view that I think is a minority opinion in the physics community, that what we physicists do is we develop these narratives, these mathematical narratives that give our best model of some aspect of physical reality. And so that's it. And so rather than the model and the narrative being reality, it's a story we tell about reality. It's predictive. It's not just made up out of a whole cloth.
Right.
Have incredible restrictions on it and very powerful implications of those stories, because they can tell us about things that we've yet to encounter.
Right.
That's a beautiful quality of these particular kind of stories. But given that view, I'm not surprised that there could be multiple narratives, describing the physical world. How do you think about it?
Look, I mean, as I just indicated, it's something that I'm not sure what to think about and that I worry about. I mean, let's take a very simple example. Talk about classical mechanics. Multiple particles floating around in a three-dimensional space, which is the subject of Newtonian mechanics. Some of our audience may have heard that there are all kinds of mathematical objects that we use to represent such a set of particles, which are convenient in many cases. In the 19th century, for example, it was discovered that it was very convenient and led to very beautiful pieces of mathematics to talk, instead of talking about three-dimensional space with n particles floating around in it, to talk about something that they called phase space, which was which had 6n dimensions, where n is the number of particles you're talking about, so that a single point in this phase space would pick out for a set of n particles what each of their positions were and what each of their momenta were. And it turns out that if you look at the evolution of this system in phase space rather than in ordinary three-dimensional space, it suggests all kinds of beautiful mathematical shortcuts and deep understandings of the mathematical structure of what's going on, so on and so forth. So look, take an example like that. The phase space representation is, to use the word you used, completely isomorphic to the three-dimensional representation. So suppose you're an instructor teaching a class on analytical mechanics, and a student comes, and you talk about phase space, and a student comes up to you after class. Actually, let's imagine two students. Student number one: wow, professor, you changed my life today. You really blew my mind today. Professor says, what do you have in mind? Student says, I now realize, I thought all my life that we lived in a three-dimensional space, and it turns out we live in this 6n dimensional space. It just completely blows my mind. Thank you, you've changed my life. I mean, I'm never going to be the same. I think most people would say the professor ought to say to him, no, you have a misunderstanding here. This high-dimensional space is a convenient mathematical device. I
don't know why we can't use the gimbals
as a picture of what the world is like. And the student says, I don't understand. Well, okay, that's the first student. Student number two comes and says, Professor, you completely blew my mind today. I'm never going to be the same. I now realize that there isn't even such a thing as a question about whether we live in a 3-dimensional space or in a 6n-dimensional space, because the two models are completely mathematically isomorphic, okay? It's not saying a different thing to say that we live in a 3-dimensional space and we live in a 6n-dimensional space. I guess I think, but this is a big, old topic of discussion in philosophy of science. I guess I think that the right thing to say to that student as well is, no, you're missing something important here, okay? It's true that there's a mathematical isomorphism between certain aspects of these two models, but that doesn't mean...
Any shade jump on my map?
Standing by.
Live in a 3-dimensional space.
Engage.
Quantum drive engaged.
The student says, but why? Both of them are empirically equivalent to one another. What possible reason could there be to prefer one of these claims as the realistic description of the world to the other? And there are a lot of responses.
In a shade jump.
Engaging jump drive.
Whether any of them are adequate, I'm not sure. But here's how I can imagine responding. I say, look.
All right, we'll be right back.
There's something you don't understand about the nature of scientific inquiry. First of all, given any set of data, there'll always be an infinite number of theories, most of them completely wacky, that are consistent with this data, okay? The planets are moving the way they do because angels are carrying them around who intend to deceive you about the actual laws of physics. Blah, blah, blah. This is just old-fashioned philosophical skepticism. There'll always be an infinite number of theories that explain any finite body of data. That's just a simple logical truth. So there's always a question. Why do we choose some of these theories as opposed to others at each step of the way? And I guess I think one of the elements is something like this. People in philosophy often speak of what they call a manifest image of the world, okay? This is of course there's no literal such thing, but what you have in mind here, it's something like talking about the state of nature when you talk about political philosophy, or what the world was like before there were any social organization. Here you talk about how the world looks to you prior to any serious scientific investigation or philosophical reflection. So, for example, it looks like the tables and chairs around you are solid objects that continuously fill the space they take up, rather than being 90% empty space or 99.999% empty space as we think now. Blah, blah, blah. There is this mythical object called the manifest image of the world. And the simple story about science is you start with the manifest image of the world. You have a sort of naive trust in the reports of your senses, so on. And slowly there turn out to be tensions in this manifest image. Here's a beautiful example. You put a pencil in a glass of water.
That is a beautiful photo. So it turns out one of my family members is getting a new dog.
You look at the pencil, it appears to be bent in the glass of water. You run your finger along the pencil, it doesn't feel like it's bent in the glass of water. Oh my God, we've got a tension in the manifest image, okay? We got to do something about this. What do you do about this? Well, you develop a theory of optics, you develop a theory of refraction, which explains to you why the pencil would look bent and not feel bent. And it turns out in this case, your tactile sensations were more reliable than your visual sensations. And now, what's going on now after this first step is called science. Okay, and you keep on rolling with this, and you discover more tensions, and you fix them up, and you discover more tensions, blah blah blah. And if everything works out, long after all of us are dead, this scientific project gets finished, okay? This scientific project gets to a place of what philosophers refer to as reflective equilibrium, okay? That is, you get to a place where these tensions don't keep arising again and again everywhere you look. But one of the things you want to be able to do once this story is over, I take it, is to explain to anybody who wants to ask how it is you got exactly from the manifest image to the finished scientific image of the world. And one of the things I take it you want to be able to say for yourself is that you only relinquished features of the manifest image when you were forced to by the data, okay? When you were forced to. You didn't make any gratuitous jumps, okay? You didn't say, you know what, I decided now I'm going to believe that the moon is made of green cheese. Why? I like it, okay? You didn't do that, okay? What you had to start with was the manifest image.
Deploy landing gear.
You took a whole bunch
Deploying landing gear.
from the manifest image. But each of those steps, if they were conducted in accordance with good scientific practice, was a step that there was serious pressure on you to take from the data, okay? You didn't do any of it gratuitously, okay? So there is, I think, a good scientific principle, a valid scientific principle of scientific inference, which I would call, I guess, a principle of conservatism or something like that. You don't take another step away from the manifest image without having been forced to. You don't take a step away from the manifest image just for the fun of it, because if you do that, science is no longer exciting. If Brian Greene comes to you and says, we've discovered that time is going sideways and so on and so forth, you want to know that Brian Greene is talking about cognitive decisions that people had good reason to make. Otherwise, it's not exciting. Okay.
Right, let's go and give these
so there is this kind of principle of conservatism.
And that's what you tell, presumably, to these students.
That's what you tell to these students. No, you're wrong. Okay, you're wrong. The possibility of representing this in phase space does not mean that it's not possible to represent it in three-dimensional space, which is the more conservative thing to do. We haven't been forced away from that representation yet. Okay? If we haven't been forced away from it, we shouldn't take seriously. We shouldn't take this high-dimensional space metaphysically seriously. Right, exactly right.
But that does suggest that, I mean, again, I don't want to go too sci-fi off the rails here, but if there's another intelligence that has radically different sensory apparatus, conceivably their manifest image, if that's the correct terminology, will be so different from ours that their scientific trajectory might lead them to phase space.
That's a really interesting question. You could elaborate that question further. I'm not sure, this is probably the last step I'll be able to take in this elaboration at the moment. But yeah, I think that is a good question. That might get you very worried that science is more culture specific or more creature specific or something like that than we would like it to be. On the other hand, it might be that from the science we have, we might be able to make an argument that for any other alien civilization that we're capable of even recognizing as a civilization, recognizing as inquiring into nature, so on and so forth, there's a limit to how different their manifest image could be. A limit that's just imposed
I'm just going to go
by
give a
natural
pizza, guys.
selection. Okay, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if you could make an argument like that in detail, but what you're saying is a really good question. Maybe there's something calming to say about it, maybe there's not.
Right.
But the worry when you get to things like string theory, or even when you get to things like the foundations of quantum mechanics, is that we have already gone so far from the manifest image that it's no longer clear what the conservative choice is. Okay, all the choices are completely wacky relative to the manifest image where we started. So it may be that when you go deep enough, this principle of conservatism loses its grip, okay, loses its ability to lead you, okay?
Yeah.
And in that case, I think that's a new and interesting worry about a different way in which science might fail to realize its original naively realist aspirations. Yeah. I agree with that. And I think that's a worry both about how wacky things are getting in foundations of quantum mechanics and about how wacky they're getting in places like string theory.
So I'd love to turn to the quantum mechanics a little bit more fully, but I can't help but quickly noting that I'd love those two students to come to my next class in analytic mechanics, where I teach them Hamilton-Jacobi theory, and that point in phase space doesn't even move.
Exactly, right.
And yet it has the whole dynamics of the world in it.
It's absolutely, and also, you know, and Hamilton-Jacobi theory is sort of the pinnacle of this. It's so beautiful, you know, and it's so seductive in that way. And you really have to sort of hang on to your seat and say, yeah, this aesthetic reaction I'm having is not necessarily good grounds for believing what's true or false about the world. But that's right. That's right. Hamilton-Jacobi theory is the most extreme example of something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So back to quantum mechanics from classical mechanics, and this idea of the equipment, the instruments, and the people all themselves being made up of particles described by quantum mechanics, and therefore they themselves in aggregate should be described quantum mechanically.
Right.
You know, the big headache for a long time has been to describe how that piece of equipment, when it encounters, say, an electron that's in a mixture, or in technical language, a superposition of being here and there with some probability dictated by the mathematics of quantum physics, how is it that the instrument, when it measures the position of that particle, gets one definite result? Because in quantum mechanics, this idea of eliminating one of the possibilities is incompatible with the dynamical equations.
Right, exactly right.
So the whole measurement problem. So this has, in some sense, been a wrench in the works is probably not the right metaphor here.
It's not a bad metaphor.
All right, then we'll run with it. Well, you can't really run with that's a different metaphor. But anyway,
you shouldn't run with a scissors, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this has been a headache for a long time.
Right.
And look, I remember when I first came to Columbia. You probably don't remember this, but we met for lunch, I think at Faculty House or something like that. And you we were chatting, you nonchalantly said, so what do you think about the quantum measurement problem? And I just sort of said, oh, well, it's a many worlds interpretation of
right,
you know,
right.
Yeah. And then for 3 or 4 hours, you beat on me, and I left that lunch being, oh my gosh, I'm far less certain than I was of things before, because, you know, like many physicists, I had not really interrogated this approach deeply enough to encounter the kinds of issues that you and your colleagues in the foundations had been talking about for a long time. So maybe you can just give us a sense of the measurement problem from your perspective, and then maybe you can just walk through some of the approaches that are on the table.
Good. So I think you set it up pretty nicely in what you said. You know, what's common to everybody is that at least subatomic particles can be in these strange situations which people call superpositions, say of being located at this point or being located at that point. This superposition, it is, if you think it through, it's not right to think of this superposition as a case where it's either at this point or at that point, but we just don't know. There's also things wrong with thinking of it naively as being at both points. There's definitely a lot wrong with thinking of it as being at neither point. And the puzzle here is, But wait a minute, that sort of exhausts
Try
the
landing
logical possibility.
Landing gear up.
If location is the right way to talk about it at all. So, this is a puzzle, but maybe one wants to say, well, the subatomic world is just weird, and that's all there is to it. What's called the measurement problem is this: if you ask the mathematics of quantum mechanics, if you suppose that everything can be described quantum mechanically, not only these particles, but everything that large collections of these particles produce, measuring instruments, human beings, universities, blah, blah, blah. All of these are in some principled sense quantum mechanical objects because they're just aggregates of these subatomic particles, which everybody agrees are quantum mechanical. If you take a view like this seriously, which is exactly what Bohr cautioned us not to do, okay? But if you really want to develop a consistent description of the whole world, it turns out that it's not that hard to ask yourself, look, suppose I had a device with a pointer on it, a macroscopic device, which when I place the particle here and I turn the machine on, the pointer always swings to there. And when I place the particle here and turn the machine on, the pointer always swings to there. Good. You can ask the quantum mechanical equations of motion, what would happen to such a pointer if when I turned it on, the particle was not here and not here, but in one of these quantum mechanical superpositions of being here and there?
I think it's just a different loadout at the start.
The quantum mechanical equations of motion give a very straightforward answer. The pointer will go into a superposition of pointing this way and pointing that way. A superposition which is what physicists call entangled with the superposition of the particle itself. Forget about what that means for the moment, but the pointer itself will go into a superposition. That is, the pointer itself will go into a state where there is no fact of the matter about where it's located, where asking whether the pointer is pointing to the right or to the left is like asking about the marital status of the number 5. Or something like that. It's the kind of thing that philosophers refer to as a category mistake, okay? By simply raising the question, you're showing that you don't know what's going on. No, the number 5 doesn't have a marital status. Marital status is not the kind of concept that applies to the number 5. Okay, so what you want to do in one way or another in solving the measurement. So people say, look, maybe elementary particles behave in some crazy way, but I know damn well from everyday laboratory experience what happens when I turn my measuring device on. Sometimes the pointer goes this way, sometimes it goes that way. Nothing else ever happens, okay? I never see it being vague or undefined, or I don't even know what that would look like, but I don't need to know what it would look like because I know it doesn't happen. When I turn on these measuring devices, sometimes the pointer points this way, sometimes the pointer points that way, with fixed probabilities that I can predict from the initial state of the particle that I'm measuring. That's what happens. How is it? That seems to be a direct violation of the quantum mechanical equations of motion. How is it, if we want to take seriously that we have a single model for all of reality, us and the subatomic particles and so on, we've got to figure out how to get rid of this problem. And there's a famous quote from John Bell, which I think is very helpful here, which he says, look, there are two possibilities. One is the equations of motion which gave us this result about the pointer are just wrong. They give us good results about the way subatomic particles behave, but when you put a lot of these particles together, there must be some kind of an effect which is too weak to see on the level of individual subatomic particles, but somehow builds up when you've got a bunch of them put together in a pointer, that the equations which led to the prediction that the pointer is going to end up in a superposition of being here and here are just wrong, okay? And we have to modify them somehow, okay? And in the 1980s, such a modification was actually proposed by 3 Italian physicists named Ghilardi, Ramini, and Weber. And they very cleverly thought of a way of modifying the equations whose effects would be almost completely unobservable on the level of the behavior of individual or small numbers of subatomic particles, but which would build up in the appropriate way when you have something big like a pointer, and make it the case that we wouldn't get in the end a superposition of 2 pointer positions. We'd get a probabilistic evolution in which we sometimes ended up with a pointer pointing here and other times ended up with a pointer pointing there. So that's one of the these are called collapse models. Even back in the 1920s and 30s, there were people who going against Bohr's advice wanted to go native, wanted to develop a single language for everything, wanted to sort of give its due to the observation that if these subatomic particles are quantum mechanical, then we must be quantum mechanical too, because we're nothing but aggregates of these subatomic particles. So people like von Neumann, in his famous book, The Mathematical Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, does say, look, maybe the way to solve this problem is to introduce a violation of the Schrödinger equation, which he called the collapse
I'm going to try and leave.
His proposal for having
this was going to say I wanted to exit the game to a menu, but
equation occur when you do a measurement, okay? And locutions like when you do a measurement are just not...
Initiate jump on my mark?
You don't have
Affirmative.
anything like the precision or
Engage.
That we
Engaging jump.
propositions that occur in a fundamental physical theory. So that looked like a ridiculous theory. The achievement of Ghilardi and Ramini and Weber many, many decades later in the 1980s was to come up with a precise formulation of a claim like this that didn't involve any words like measurement.
Huge
But it had the
speculation.
consequences that von Neumann hoped for.
But
So-
just one question on that, David. I mean, if GRW had presented their ideas at the 1927 Solvay conference,
Right,
for instance,
right.
I know no one can really answer, but do you think Bohr would have been open to at
It's
least
a
the
good
possibility?
question. Bohr was, Bohr is such I must say that, you play this parlor game, which historical figure would you most like to have over for dinner? Okay. If you ask me, it's Bohr. Okay, for me.
For me, it's Shakespeare.
I don't know what the deal was with Bohr. There was the guy. What's clear is the guy must have been one of the most charismatic human beings that anybody has ever met, that has ever walked on the face of the earth, because the smartest people in the world at that time
excuse me,
worshipped him. Okay, really, he was kind of a Gurdjieff kind of figure, or something like that. He was this guru, and the funny thing is, and he shares this with charismatic mystics like Gurdjieff. You go and read what was supposed to be his wisdom, you can't make sense of it. Okay, you can't even figure out if 2 of the pages were reversed. Okay, but everyone who took a walk in the woods with him for a half an hour, their life was changed. Okay, and these were the smartest people in the world. So, Bohr is an extremely mysterious figure for me. I don't know what he would have said. I do think he was very invested in the idea that Einstein had left physics with a whole radically new vision. Okay, maybe the vision of geometrizing all of physics or something, and that Bohr felt he needed to leave physics with a similarly radical and similarly sweeping vision, and he was very, very invested in that. Certainly, you know, I don't know what Bohr would have thought of GRW, but we do know what Bohr would have thought of what Bohr thought of Many Worlds interpretation that you mentioned. And he was, without offering any reasons, not only dismissive of it, but apparently irritated by it and angered by it. So,
can you tell the audience just a little bit of Many Worlds, just to?
So let me. Let me get to. So let me get to it through this Bell remark. So, Bell said very nicely. Look, what the measurement problem is telling us about quantum mechanics is that either the equations of motion are wrong or they're incomplete. Okay. The wrong alternative is the one that is the alternative of thinking that they're wrong is the one we just explored with these collapse theories like GRW. The equations of motion are simply wrong. We have to amend them a little bit so as not to mess up any of the predictions they make, which we know are true, but to also make it the case that the pointer does choose one position or the other once we do the measurement. Good. There's a second alternative. They're incomplete. Okay. Here's an example of that. This is Bohm's famous theory. Look, it's true what the quantum mechanical equations of motion say in a situation like this. The quantum mechanical wave function of the pointer does show a bump corresponding to the pointer pointing this way and a bump corresponding to the pointer pointing that way.
Yeah, I'm full of that, but...
Because the wave function turns out not to be a complete description of the state of a system like this. There's some additional fact, some little X that you put on one of the bumps in the wave function and not the other, which indicates where the pointer really is, okay? Now, if these X's exist, you have to have a serious physical theory of them. You have to tell everybody what their equations of motion are, so on and so forth. These X's are sometimes referred to in the literature as hidden variables, although that's an awkward name, because in the case of the pointer, it's obvious that the X's are the things that we actually see, okay? But anyway, there is a famous example of a theory like this, Bohm's version of quantum mechanics, Bohm's hidden variable theory, or what's sometimes called Bohmian mechanics, where he does have these X's, okay? And where you can see, aha, I see, even though the wave function does what the equations say it's going to do, the X is here and not here, okay? And that's what it is about the state of the world that determines that we see the pointer there and not there. Good. So those are the two alternatives that Bell mentioned. Okay.
I don't mean to take you off course, so hold for half a second, just because it's interesting to note that a version of that theory was presented at the Solvay.
Yes, that's right. This is Roy. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. That's right. And it is a good question. Unfortunately,
max power to weapons.
Know how to De Broglie folded way, okay, under criticism, which it would
by Pauli. I think it was Pauli.
That's right, by Pal, exactly. Yeah. Which in hindsight it would have been easy to respond to. Okay, so he folded very, very quickly, and. So presumably Bohr didn't need to get into the act, okay? But you're right, a theory like a sort of primitive, preliminary version of a theory like that was presented at that Solvay conference. It got dispensed with very quickly. In hindsight, it got dispensed with much, much too quickly. But right, that's what happened to that. Good. Then there's a third alternative, which has been pursued, which Bell doesn't mention, okay? Which is to say, no, I want to have my cake and eat it too. That is, the quantum mechanical wave function is a complete description of the world, and the Schrodinger equation is exactly true. Okay, and now the question is going to be, well then, how do you explain the fact that in the laboratory we always see the pointer pointing either this way or that way? We never see some combination of the two, whatever that might mean. That's what we see. The idea is, you haven't gone far enough in applying the Schrodinger equation here. Apply it also to you looking at the pointer. There's now going to be a branch of the superposition in which you see the pointer pointing this way, and a branch of the superposition in which you see the pointer pointing that way. And it's easy to derive from the equations of motion that, as it were, the person in this branch won't be aware of the existence of the person in the other branch, yada, yada, yada. So maybe, in fact, we didn't have to go to all this trouble, okay? We didn't have to think about what might be wrong with the Schrodinger equation or what might be incomplete about the wave function. Turns out the Schrodinger equation is not wrong, not even a little wrong. And the wave function is not incomplete at all, okay? Rather, what quantum mechanics is depicting is a universe that keeps on splitting into multiple copies of itself. Every time something like an experiment occurs or something like an observation occurs, and that's the picture of the world. This is a way of confronting the measurement problem, which has a very understandable appeal to lots of theoretical physicists, and which did, as you described of yourself. And I take it that a big part of the appeal is this is the way of solving the measurement problem that does the least violence, indeed that does no violence at all to the original mathematical structure of quantum mechanics. The idea here was the solution to the measurement problem is not to modify either the equations of motion or the description of the world. The solution to the measurement problem is to realize that if you just calm down for a minute and take a breath, there was never a problem in the first place, okay? Quantum mechanics, as originally presented, was completely adequate for this. It's just that following quantum mechanics all the way out to its logical conclusions was something that not enough people had the stomach for, as it were. Okay, because it was going to commit you to the world splitting into lots of different branches where there are multiple yous having different destinies, seeing different outcomes to experiments, blah, 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 blah. I think what I must have spent several hours browbeating you about on the occasion you described is that I've thought for a long time that the many worlds interpretation is not up to the task of saying why we see the frequencies of various different experimental outcomes that we do. On this theory, everything always happens. Period. End of story. It's like, in order to make sense of it, suppose you're talking to an amoeba.
Yeah, I think we're just screwed on this.
Into two amoebas. And you say, tell me, what do you think the chances are that you're going to end up on the right? Okay. It seems to me the right thing for the amoeba to say is, gee, I don't even understand the question. I mean, the first thing to say is, I'm not sure what you mean by I here, okay? I'm going to be related to the one on the right in very much the same way that I'm related to the one on the left. They're both my descendants. And the situation is completely deterministic. There's going to be one on the left. There's going to be one on the right. I just don't understand where talk about the probability that I'm going to be the one on the right can even get its foot in the door here. This is a long story. There have been lots of really ingenious attempts from which we've learned a lot to answer a challenge like this. I don't think any of these attempts, however ingenious, have been successful. And as more time goes by, I'm more and more convinced that I can see reasons why they can't be successful.
But just to say, I mean, there are many, not many, but there are a handful of people who've spent a lot of time on this very problem. You know, the whole group at Oxford,
Exactly. Very people who I enormously respect.
Yeah.
And indeed, people who I've learned an enormous amount from in having these debates. And not only have we learned a lot about quantum mechanics from these debates, we've learned a lot about the basic nature of probability from these debates. You know, there's an old, I mean, this will sidetrack us for 5 minutes, but whenever I start a philosophy of science class, you know, I usually find it good to get the students interested, to sort of convince them in some simple way that there's a locution they use 100 times every day, and that they don't have a clue what it means, in fact. And a very easy way to do that is to start with the problem of probability. Suppose a Martian comes down to Earth and masters all of the sort of indicative locutions in English. He knows what it means to say there's a chair here. He knows what it means to say the coin landed.
When are they supposed to fix an
update? He knows what it means to say the coin landed tail.
I swear they were supposed to fix that
update. But the Martian is puzzled about probabilistic locutions. And he comes to you one day and he says, you know, sometimes people say the coin will land heads. And I know how to decide whether this prediction turned out to be true or false. And sometimes they say it'll land tails. But on other occasions, they say the probability is 60% that the coin will land heads. Could you tell me what that means? I don't seem to have the vocabulary there. And there's an interesting conversation in the class, which usually goes in roughly the same way, where somebody will say, well, it means that if you flip it 10 times, 6 of them will be heads. And you say, really? I mean, if you added to the end of your sentence for sure or with certainty, would it still be true? And the student says, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I don't mean for sure 6 of them will be heads. I mean, probably 6 of them will be heads. And then you say, no, but you don't want to say that because you're using a term, you know, you're using the term that you're defining in the definition. Your definition is going to be worthless. It's going to be circular. Goes on from there. Somebody suggests if you flip it an infinite number of times, 60% of them will be heads. Then you have to point out a couple of things, one of which is, I'm not sure what 60% of infinity actually means. Then somebody will start talking about limits. That's wrong too. And after 15 minutes of conversation, you have the class convinced that they had no clue what they've been talking about all their lives when they talk about probability. So this debate about whether probabilities can manifest themselves properly in the many worlds interpretation has been one from which there's been a wonderful side benefit, that questions have been raised about what probability means that turn out to have been much sharper and much more informative than questions that have been asked before over hundreds of years of debate about this. Yes, it's by all means a great thing. I don't think they've succeeded in defending the many worlds interpretation, but these are people of very admirable, intelligence and creativity. And this is a discussion from which we've learned a lot.
And my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that none of them have capitulated on
That's true. If you study foundations of quantum mechanics, something you learn is that a very important engine of progress in physics and in lots of fundamental subjects is that people die, because people, once they've gotten deeply entrenched in something, have trouble giving it up. And one has to realize this about oneself as well, and you become very impressed with the fact, especially as you get older, that these are decisions that are going to be made by future generations, you know, after you're dead. Okay, and that's what's going to happen. Yes, people haven't moved very much.
Could you be entrenched in the failure of many worlds?
Of course I could be. I mean, I don't know what to say. I don't think it is, and you see it in philosophy, and one will begin to see it in physics because there's going to be such a problem of underdetermination. You see this curious phenomenon of intellectual disagreements that don't involve anything that it would be appropriate to call dishonesty, but that people really do think themselves into trenches, you know, become entrenched, and it's hard to see. It's hard to see one's way out. There's a political philosopher I like, and he says, "Look, I grew up in this labor, in this family that was involved in the labor movement, so on and so forth. I know, or I am willing to accept, that if I had grown up in a different kind of family with the same, basic cognitive apparatus, I would have reached different political conclusions about what's right and what's wrong. And I honestly don't know what to do with that knowledge. I mean, I think the way to reconcile yourself to this, so could I be entrenched? Of course I could be entrenched. I think what you have to tell, the story you have to tell yourself, which I think is a true story, is that the kind of service you're doing to the advancement of knowledge is to present the best arguments you can come up with for whatever trench you happen to have landed in. And then those arguments will be available to people in the future who are going to make less personally invested decisions on what turns out to be right and what turns out to be wrong. So yeah. I think my sense in the community of foundations of quantum mechanics, where there are debates about these sorts of things, is, no, we see what we're doing. We see that we're entrenched. Actually, that sort of entrenchment could be conceived of as something that furthers
okay, we got our next target
of knowledge. Okay, not our personal knowledge, because we're stuck wherever we're stuck, but it produces the most vigorous kind of debate you can have. It produces the best available defenses of these various things. And then
getting hit, but that's fine.
And I think the important thing to stress there, which is a point that you made, there's nothing nefarious, there's no malfeasance.
Right.
It's completely. I don't know of any colleague who doesn't work on what they work on,
right,
and hold the views that they hold because they are deeply committed to advancing truth.
Right.
That's the only thing that they're committed to.
Right.
And so, because sometimes I find it kind of sickening a little bit, but online you see these conversations about groups of physicists that are somehow hiding the truth about the failure, whether it's string theory failed, which is not, hiding the truth because they're too entrenched personally to allow the reality, and it's just such nonsense.
I think that's right.
Yeah. But anyway, putting all that to the side, GRW theory, as I understand it, is the one approach, or at least in principle, is experimentally distinguishable from, say, the de Broglie-Bohm approach, where the wave function does a little extra work than it does in the conventional approach, or many worlds, where it's just the vanilla version of quantum mechanics, properly thought about, really taking it seriously.
Sidney Coleman used to call Everett quantum mechanics in your face. Which I thought was very nice and very apt. Yeah.
No, I agree. In fact, I was working on a little thing for like 6 months on trying to work out an approach to the measurement problem, and It was in Sidney's talk.
Right, right.
I did not know. I don't know if you remember how he had this approach of trying to find eigenfunctions of the
Right.
Yeah, and the operator that actually was
Right.
describing the instrument itself as the physical system. But yes, I think quantum mechanics in your face is a great way of describing it.
Right.
But do you hold out any hope, any realistic hope of testing GRW theory?
I mean, you know, compared to what? Compared to string theory? I mean,
Here we go.
I mean, yeah. Look, something that has, you know, when GRW theory was first proposed, it was, everybody thought that if there was ever going to be a test of it, it was going to be hundreds of years away. Then there were the development of these squid devices and so on. Experimentalists have been just really, really clever. Also, people realized that in experiments that were looking for proton decay, where you had these huge tunnels full of water, huge wells full, mine shafts full of water, and you lined the whole mine shaft with these very sensitive photon detectors. It turned out that put limits on the GRW theory. That is, indeed, it's the case that, you know, when you write down the GRW theory, you have to choose new natural constants, which are going to tell you the frequency of these collapses and how violent the collapses are, and so on and so forth. Now, it just so happens that the first version of this that was written down by GRW has already been ruled out by experiment. Okay, these proton decay experiments, it turns out, have ruled them out. You can even rule them out with some squid experiments. The worry is that they have a lot of wiggle room as to where to set these constants, but the wiggle room isn't infinite. So I don't know what to say. I think that it's conceivable, you know, that over the course of the next century or something like that, experiments could take us to a place where the GRW theory no longer looks plausible. It's not logically ruled out, but you're pushing the collapse into places where there are other reasons for thinking that it's not plausible that it is. So if the question is, if the question is anything going to strictly logically rule it in or out? No, I doubt it. But I think that with the help of experiments, it could become a more or less plausible proposal than it is now.
Yeah. And the other question that comes to mind, of course, in all of this, especially when you start to talk about many worlds, where, again, if it were to succeed, you'd have this whole question of, you know, who am I if I am each of these branches? So somehow my consciousness is playing some kind of role in our discussion of this approach to quantum mechanics. Eugene Wigner was one of the people who pushed hard on the idea that consciousness was part of the issue here and needed to be taken into account if you're going to solve this measurement problem.
Right.
Where do you come?
Well, so there's several things to say about that. The way Wigner did it, you know, there's lots of debate in philosophy today. I mean, there's a whole thriving field of so-called philosophy of mind, which is centered on questions about the relationship between the physical and the mental, okay? But there's a particular attitude towards the relationship between the physical and the mental, which people refer to as interactive dualism or Cartesian dualism, which I think there's a pretty wide consensus nowadays is the wrong way to go, okay? This is the kind of view that Descartes had, that mind and matter are utterly separate things, okay? But that it's also the case that mind can influence the evolution of matter, okay? Indeed, Descartes famously thought that you could locate in space the point of interaction between mind and matter that was in the pineal gland in the human brain. Why he thought, I'm sure he had reasons for thinking that it was the pineal gland. I don't remember what they were. But people like Descartes thought not only were these two separate metaphysical realms of being, but the mental part could affect the physical part. It goes without saying that, of course, the physical part can affect the mental part. If something happens across the room that I see, that affects my mental state, okay? What's more surprising is the thought that things that originate in the mental space can end up affecting the physical space. That's what one is thinking in very old-fashioned conceptions of freedom of the will, or something like that, that there's something that could originate on the mental level, like my decision to raise my arm, and then my arm goes up. The trouble with interactive dualism is that to the extent that you want to defend interactive dualism, it looks like your attitude towards physics is not a neutral one. Your attitude toward physics must be that physics as we understand it is wrong, okay? Yeah, exactly. Because there are physical events that don't have thoroughly physical explanations, okay? Good. For that reason, most people nowadays are embarrassed to be old-fashioned interactive dualists. Wigner's thought was something like the following, and it's a lovely thought. I also think it's a crazy thought and an intellectually irresponsible thought, but you could see why somebody would get so excited. Wigner's thought was, look at this. In quantum mechanics, we have to get the wave function to do something, this collapse, that the physical equations of motion are not going to get it to do, okay? So we've thought, for the reasons I was just saying, that being an interactive dualist means you're denying that the whole physical project is correct, okay? Wigner thought, look how this turns everything upside down. We've got this job that needs to get done, namely collapsing the wave function, which it looks like physics can't do, okay? We need an interactively dualist mind to do this for us. So look how this turns the tables on the old debate. It's not only that the existence of such a mind is no longer hostile to the physical project, it's necessary to the physical project. The physical project can't achieve the completeness it wants without this thing. So he has this new, beautiful, unprecedented definition of the distinction between the mental and the physical. What it is to be a physical object, to be an isolated physical object, is to obey the Schrödinger equation. What it means for mind to be involved somewhere is that there are various very specific violations of the Schrödinger equation in these collapses, okay? Like I say, one can see why Wigner was thrilled about this. I remember when I was a young physics student, seeing Wigner talk. You're probably too young to have overlapped with Wigner.
Didn't overlap. No.
I saw Wigner give a talk where he said, literally, he said, in his opinion, dogs could probably produce collapses, but mice probably couldn't. Okay. And I remember saying to myself, this is not good. Okay. This is not a good way to do physics. Okay. That is, he was running into exactly the same problem as von Neumann had run into with the vagueness of a word like measurement. But here, the vagueness was in the meaning of a word like conscious, okay? Conscious entities could produce collapses. Purely physical entities couldn't produce collapses. And before you know it, the guy's saying that dogs can produce collapses, but mice can't. And you suddenly realize, you come down from this euphoria of thinking, oh my God, consciousness is the solution to everything, and you suddenly realize that it's gotten you nowhere, that you're right where you were with von Neumann. You've got these vague words, in von Neumann's case, measurement, in Wigner's case, consciousness. You don't know what they mean. You don't have a clue how to begin to incorporate them into anything that looks like a serious physical theory. So it was, I guess I like to think of it this way. It does show why somebody like me, who, as I said a long time ago, whose sort of basic interests were always in the philosophical direction, it shows why somebody like me would become so fascinated with the foundational problems of quantum mechanics. It shows how much